Don Mazzella here again for Small Business Digest with a cold, which I cannot shake. But anyway, we have with us today Shaara Roman. I hope I pronounced it right this time. She's here to talk about what happens when people join an organization. I want to put it that way because she and I have a differing view on that, but we're here to hear her view. Shara, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Don. Thanks so much for having me. I'm really thrilled to be here and to be a part of this conversation.
Well, first, as we always ask all our guests, tell us a little bit about yourself personally, then about your company, and then hold up your book so we know what you're talking about, and finally a website.
Absolutely. All right. Lots over there. So I'm Shaara Roman. I use the pronouns she and her. I was born in Bombay, so I'm originally from Bombay, India, but I actually grew up in Lagos, Nigeria, where I spent majority of my early childhood. I then went back to Bombay for a couple of years, went to middle school there, went to high school in England, and then went back to Nigeria where my parents lived and ended up meeting my husband, who is a Puerto Rican from the Bronx and was serving in the Marine Corps at the time. And so I share that because I've lived a very sort of very diverse sort of life in terms of the places I've lived and the experiences I've had. And lived in 4 different countries, educated in 3 before I was 20, and so I grew up always being a guest in someone else's country. So even in India, where I am technically from, I wasn't necessarily, fully at home, right? I felt sort of out of place there. So came here in my early 20s and went to college, worked in some really terrific organizations with some really terrific bosses, also had some not great experiences. Worked my way up, was the head of HR for a large trade association. And in early 2016, I decided that I really wanted to help particularly small to mid-sized companies create workplaces where everyone could thrive. And what I had noticed in my career was that report after report showed that employees were disengaged, they were unhappy, turnover was high, and really, organizations are not necessarily leaning into the things that they can do in a more strategic way, in a more employee-friendly way, to create organizations that are conducive for innovation and creativity and camaraderie and collaboration and all those things that we want. And so it was a great opportunity for me to sort of take the experience I had from a corporate perspective and start a business. So I am the founder and CEO of the Silvering Group. And we are a culture consultancy that works with organizations to really help them build better workplaces. And what that means is that we do everything from helping an organization define and articulate their aspirational culture, on creating an inclusive environment for everybody to thrive. We work to help leaders lead in a much more inclusive way to shift their mindset. We help work at that intersection of people and strategy to design programs that will allow for the changes that the organization wants to see and reinforce the behaviors that they want to see. And then finally, build the capability in the staff and the employees so that they can really fully experience what's expected of them. So our website is silveringgroup.com. So it's www.silverengroup.com. And I'm also a newly minted author. I just published my book on September 27th. It is called The Conscious Workplace: Fortify Your Culture to Thrive in Any Crisis. So
that was a pretty complete introduction. Where are you located now? Just out of curiosity.
So I'm in Arlington, Virginia. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
metropolitan city of Arlington, Virginia.
Well, let's talk about that. What you said. Organizations obviously are changing today. Um, what are some of the things that see? Let's concentrate on small business, which is what we're usually that's a much more personal environment. What are some of the things that they have to do? A leader has to do to ensure that everybody is on board.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think small businesses are no different than larger businesses, only they probably have a little bit of an advantage because they are smaller and there may be more of a family feel. And that kind of has positives and negatives to it, right? Depending on kind of how that family feel goes. So what we really want people to focus on and to think about is that the workforce is changing. And I know it might be things that it might be something that others talk about or that we might have heard about, but the workforce and the demographics are changing. They have been changing. And the people that we need to hire to come into jobs, particularly in the entry and the mid-level, have very different expectations than the people who are in leadership and who are potentially the founders and running their companies, right? You've got the Gen Zs, and you've got the millennials. I mean, millennials are now in their 40s, right? So they've been around for quite a while as well. But essentially, this, the Gen Zs and the millennials are expecting organizations that are purpose driven, that are focused on their missions, that are socially conscious, that take their needs into consideration, that recognize that their generations are way more diverse than any other generation before them, that they have technological needs, and that they want they live they work to live, right? So work is something that they do in order to have a good life, and they are not going to fall into the hustle culture and burnout and all of those things. So we have to recognize that their needs are different. There's, if you look at the two generations together, that's about 150 million. And so they have a big groundswell to be able to change the way that we do work. And if we don't recognize that and we don't realize that we do have to think differently, then it is going to be really hard to attract and retain talent to your organization, because people have options. We're seeing it now, and we've seen it for a number of years, where we've had a really tight labor market for talent that we need and we want. And people are showing it with their feet, right? If they don't like it, if they don't like the organization, they don't like the leader, they don't like the culture, they don't like what they see, what they experience, they're not going to stick around. So I think that all of those things are important to consider, that the workforce essentially is changing. The dynamic is different. We can't run our companies like we're living in the 50s or 60s in a hierarchical, top down, do what I say, suck it up, you're lucky you have a job, which I still hear out there.
Yeah, very definitely. Um, what I always laugh about is if you look at the Blondie comic strip, it hasn't changed in the 50 or 60 years that I've read it. The Mr. Diddler still kicks Dagwood, and yet it keeps going on. But that's just my view. But let's take it from your point. What does a leader need to do to make sure that when somebody comes on board, they are welcomed and integrated?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think it's a really tough question, right? Or a tough problem right now, particularly as we are often hybrid or fully remote, and we don't even have sort of that sort of mecca, that office where people are coming into. So managers and leaders need to be much more intentional with how they lead their teams and how they manage the people that they're working with. And that means they're going to have to spend a lot more time with the care and feeding of their folks than they did before. Before it might have been easy to do a drive-by and check in on someone. Well, now you're going to have to pick up the phone or, schedule a Zoom or, do something that is much more intentional. So one is be intentional, be really conscious of the fact that you have a new person or a set of new people that are coming in, get to know them, build relationships with them. So really find ways to get to know who they are, what makes them tick, what are their motivators, what are the things that that are challenges for them that they don't enjoy doing. Learn about their family, learn about their background, learn about where they grew up, learn about all of those things that make up who we are. We're not just Joe Schmo, the accountant that shows up at work, right? Often I'm a mom, I'm a wife, I'm a daughter, I'm a sister, I'm a business owner, I'm an author, I'm a friend, right? I have all these different dimensions. And all of the people that we work with have those. Trying to understand their life experiences and their lived experiences is super important. So I'd say relationships are important. Second, I would say, empathy is really key. Empathy is empathy is really about putting ourselves in other people's shoes, right? And thinking about who they are and how they show up and what we need to do, and recognize that everyone is showing up as a unique individual. And we're not hiring robots, we're not hiring sort of widgets, right? So we have to really be empathetic and recognize where each individual is coming from. I think the third thing is communication. I cannot underscore how important communication is, and using different forms of communication, whether it's one-on-one, through a phone, through video, through in-person discussion, whether it's using technology like Slack or Teams, or whatever chat functionality you have. But communication is really important, and recognize that we need to sometimes hear things multiple times in many different ways in order for it to register. And with that communication is authentic communication. So a lot of times what we see with clients is that managers, leaders are very afraid or concerned, particularly in small businesses, to be transparent about the business, right? How much do we share about revenue? How much do we share about margin? How much do we share about a customer problem we might be having? All of those things. And there is definitely a balance to strike, and an important, there are different considerations as you think about transparency, but transparency and authenticity are really important in communication. In this day and age, people can see through you when you try to pull the wool over their eyes, right? They can see through you if you're reading from a script that somebody else created. If you kind of try to underplay or downplay what's happening in the market or what the impact is on your business, most of the time the people on your team are smart, right? In fact, all of the time, they're probably smart. They know what's really going on. They're actually probably more in touch with the customer than you are, depending on their job. And so being really authentic and transparent in that communication is important. And the fourth thing is really around diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? When you're bringing people on, think about what your team looks like today. And if your team does not represent what America looks like, then you probably need to ask yourself some questions around what do you need to do to ensure that your organization represents what the rest of the country looks like. And diversity is one element, right? But diversity in and of itself is not the answer to any business being successful. There needs to be an act around inclusion. And then you need to really create a sense of belonging and empower people to do the job that you've hired them to do. So those would be the four things that I would say.
Well, then let me just turn it around for 1 minute. What's the responsibility of the employee?
Yeah, that's a great question. This is definitely a two-way street. So employees need to lean into all of this as well, right? When they're coming into an organization, they need to seek people out, seek things out. They need to ask questions. They need to understand the lay of the land. They need to speak up. They need to share where they're coming from and what motivates them and what excites them. They need to raise their hand and take on new opportunities or provide solutions to problems that they might see. So yeah, it's a two-way, it is a two-way street, but I think that it is on the employer uh, and the people that are there to actually make that first move to pave the way to create that safe space. Because if you don't have what we call sort of in this work, the psychological safety, right? For people to feel like I can raise my hand, or I can ask that question, or I can go out on a limb, or what's going to happen if I make a mistake, right? If you haven't created that psychological safety through relationships and through empathy and through sort of really getting to know folks and building a diverse and inclusive team, then it's going to be really hard for the employee. Think about it as having a party at your house or inviting guests into your house, right? You make them comfortable. Can I take your coat? Would you like a drink? Have a seat. What can I get you? Right? As the host, you're the one who's creating that space for your guest to feel more comfortable, to engage in whatever activity you might have. And so if an employer, a business manager, a leader, a CEO thinks about it in that respect, that they are the host, that they're inviting people into their organization to be a part of their community, to be a part of their family, they have to really pave the way and lead the way.
Yeah, yeah. Um, or a lot of organizations, for instance, if you make a mistake, you're out. I
Yeah.
mean, that's the lay of the land. I'm just reading a book about George C. Marshall, and why we were successful in World War II is because he allowed people to learn from their mistakes. But I've been in organizations where people simply will not um, make a decision because making a decision puts them on the hook.
Yeah, for sure. And how does that make you feel when you've worked in organizations like that, right?
Well, you're looking at the wrong person. I just we can go into detail.
Yeah.
No,
Well, but
well,
most people are fearful, right? So most people,
absolutely,
right, get shut
they
down.
lived in fear. But
Exactly.
your argument, your belief is that if we have a more open, if I'm hearing you correctly, if it's more open and communicative, a lot of that fear will go away.
If it's open and communicative in the right way, right? You can communicate in a very fear gendering way, in a way that makes people feel fearful, in a way that makes people feel punitive. So it's not just communication flat out, right? It is leaning into that empathy and that relationship building and being transparent and being authentic. It's all of that coming together. But yes, if you create that safe place where you sort of talk about, listen, the way we're going to learn is by making mistakes. Think about riding a bike, right? Nobody jumps on a bike and zooms off right away, or maybe not no one, but most people don't, right? It's trial and error. You fall off the bike, you scrape your knee, you crash into the bush, the wall, whatever it is, and you learn. And we have to take that same lens as we are in our workplaces to say, mistakes are going to happen. They're part of human nature. And instead of demonizing the person and the mistake, we look at it as a learning opportunity. And that's how you create that psychological safety in the workplace, that you can ask a question that might be viewed as quote unquote a dumb question. And in my opinion, there are no dumb questions, right? If you have a question, most likely someone else does. And if someone can learn from that answer, then it's a great question.
Okay, your book again and your website.
My book is called The Conscious Workplace. We can do a show and tell here. The Conscious Workplace: Fortify Your Culture to Thrive in Any Crisis. It's available really everywhere books are sold. There is actually a website related to the book, which is pretty easy. It's my first name and last name all together. So it's www.shaararoman.com. And there is a company website as well called, the company's Silverine Group, www.silverenegroup.com.
I'm going to push back a little bit on you because I'm from the generation where if I say jump, you ask how high as you go up.
Oh yeah, I don't subscribe to that theory.
Mhm. Well, but but it seems to me that it was successful up until quite recently, and uh, what is it about this generation? For instance, I don't know if you saw the story that the students at NYU complained because a professor gave them too hard an exam, and they fired the professor. That to me is um, it's giving the inmates in charge of the asylum. Uh, how does that compute with what you're saying?
So I did not read that story. So I don't want to opine on just the facts that you've shared because there are always two sides to everything. But you know, I think this the model of, you know, I say jump, you say how high. My husband is a Marine, right? I kind of shared that in the beginning. He still probably thinks a little bit that way, but that was how he was broken up, right? Brought up. That's kind of how the Marine Corps sort of breaks you down and then builds you back up again. But if we think about the natural, so it's not just generational, right? I think all of us as human beings want autonomy. We want to be good at what we do well. We want to be empowered to do that work. And we want to be able to connect our work to purpose, right? We want to feel like we are making a difference in whatever it is that we do. Because so in the past, um, you know, it was the way it was. And I don't think that people felt not even that I believe that, I've seen the research around it, that we did not feel that we could speak up and that we could push back against what was the status quo. And secondly, the United States was incredibly successful in those years. So when you're successful, you don't challenge what's working. And my hypothesis is you could potentially have been even more successful if you had given people more autonomy, given people more empowerment, given people more connection to purpose and why. And that is going to be the big question, right? Is what are you leaving on the table that you don't even know?
Mhm.
So, and if you look at, there was a company that we actually talk about in the book called Lisa. It's a mattress company. They, during the pandemic, they were a successful company, but they were starting to hit a little bit of, you know, a few bumps. And then during the pandemic, they saw an opportunity to provide mattresses to hospitals, because hospitals need beds, right, for all their critically ill COVID patients. And they took an incredibly long cycle of creating a bed and a mattress, and they shrunk that down to just a few weeks. And they did that by decentralizing power. They did that by flattening their organization. They did that by empowering people to make decisions. They did it by asking for input from the people who were closest to the product. So here was a successful company that was well loved in their community. They're based down in the Norfolk, Virginia area. Everything was good, right? And what happened was with this change, they were able to be great. And I think that's the piece. It's really hard to say, um, it's hard to quantify what you're giving up and what you can do when you're already doing well.
Okay. You have just 2 minutes left. What would you like to leave our audience with?
Well, I'd like to leave them with, you know, we are in a different world. The world is changing at a rapid pace, and we can't do things the way we've always done them. So I invite them to read my book, to maybe think about some of the points that are in the book, and to embrace that we need to build organizations where the generations that are coming after us can really bring their best and brightest talents and thrive.
Mm. Okay. On that note, Shara Roman, we
Yes,
say thank you so much for a very illuminating time. Thank you.
you're welcome, Don. Thank you so much. Bye.